Oh, yeah.
All right, well, today, my friends, we are reading in the book of Acts about the Acts of the Apostles and Disciples. Chapter 9, verse 32. I'm feeling ambitious, hoping that you guys are okay with going all the way to 43. Because non-coincidentally, we are going to read about the resurrection of a woman. All right. Let's pray. God, we come to you now. We come to your word, desiring truth from you, Lord, to realign our hearts to your great will. To light our path. To live in your way, God. Teach us today. Soften our hearts. Open our ears. Draw us together in communion with you. We love you. Amen. All right, chapter 9, verse 32. Here I go. I think we'll do 2 readings of this morning. It's a little longer. Now, as Peter was traveling around from place to place, he also came down to the saints who lived in Lydda. He found there a man named Aeneas, who had been confined to a mattress for 8 years because he was paralyzed. Peter said to him, Aeneas, Jesus the Christ heals you. Get up and make your own bed. And immediately he got up, and all those who lived in Lydda and Sharon saw him, and they turned to the Lord. Now in Joppa there was a disciple named Tabitha, which in translation means Dorcas, unfortunately for her. She was continually doing good deeds and acts of charity. And at that time she became sick and died. And when they had washed her body, they placed it in an upstairs room. Because Lydda was near Joppa, when the disciples heard that Peter was there, they sent 2 men to him and urged him, "Come to us without delay." So Peter got up and went with them, and when he arrived, they brought him to the upper room. All the widows stood beside him, crying and showing him the tunics and other clothing Dorcas used to make while she was with them. But Peter sent them all outside. He knelt down and prayed. Turning to the body, he said, "Tabitha, get up." And then she opened her eyes, and when she saw Peter, she sat up. He gave her his hand and helped her get up. Then he called the saints and widows and presented her alive. This became known throughout all Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. So Peter stayed many days in Joppa with a man named Simon, a tanner. Okay, who's next?
I can take a pass.
Awesome. Thank you.
As Peter traveled about the country, 32, right? Is where we started.
Yes, 32.
Aeneas and Dorcas. Um, as Peter traveled about the country, he went to visit the Lord's people who lived in Lydda. There he found a man named Aeneas. I always thought it was Ananias, uh, who was paralyzed and had been bedridden for 8 years. Ananias, and I'm sorry, what's the proper pronunciation?
I think it's Aeneas.
Aeneas.
Aeneas, I think. That's how,
Aeneas. Okay.
yeah, that's what I think.
Aeneas. Peter said to him, Jesus Christ heals you. Get up and roll up your mat. Immediately, Aeneas got up. All those who lived in Lydda and Sharon, saw him and turned to the Lord. In Joppa, there was a disciple named Tabitha. In Greek, her name is Dorcas. She was always doing good and helping the poor. About that time, she became sick and died, and her body was washed and placed in an upstairs room. Lydda was near Joppa. So when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydda, they sent 2 men to him and urged him, please come at once. Peter went with them, and when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around him, crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. Peter sent them all out of the room. Then he got down, on his knees and prayed. Turning toward the dead woman, he said, Tabitha, get up. She opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He took her by the hand and helped her to her feet. Then he called for the believers, especially the widows, and presented her to them alive. This became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord. Peter stayed in Joppa for some time with a tanner named Simon.
All right, thank you. Huh. Okay. What's standing out today to you guys?
Easy. Dorcas and Tabitha. Tabitha is Aramaic. This is Greek for gazelle, according to a footnote.
Huh. I'm glad you said that because I was curious about that. That was one of the things in my head. It's like, okay, why do we have the two different versions of the name and one of them being, translated something? Okay, so you're saying Tabitha was Aramaic
Mm-hmm.
and
And
Dorcas was
Dorcas is
Greek?
Greek.
Dorcas Greek. And Tabitha is Aramaic. Wow, those are really different. Oh, it's because it means gazelle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Greek.
English is gazelle.
Okay, so Greek for gazelle is Dorcas. Greek or Aramaic for gazelle is Tabitha.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, so her name was really Gazelle, I guess.
Yes.
And interesting. And Peter addressed her in Aramaic, but
Yeah.
because this is written, this letter was written in Greek. Paul or Luke, I guess, would have had to say that it's Dorcas was her name. Translated, that he was basically telling them that her name was Gazelle, but he was saying it in Greek. Okay, well, that makes sense. Gazelle. Huh. I wonder why he did that. Why was that important? Why didn't he just say her name was Tabitha?
Hmm.
Do you think it was relevant, like the meaning of her name? Seems like that would be why.
It's like it's the same question of why do I have a footnote that translates it to English? I mean, we don't hear Aeneas having his name translated. Sorry, I probably shouldn't
I
keep
did.
trying.
You're right. I didn't hear that until now. What were you gonna? What were you saying? Seriously, what were you gonna say? I got distracted.
Like,
Well, we
oh,
don't see like guys like Barnabas and I don't know Ananias. They never tell us Ananias's translated name. What does it mean in
Right.
English? What does Barnabas mean in English?
Yeah.
So
Great point. So what's the takeaway there? Gazelle. She gets up and she runs around like a gazelle? I don't know. She serves the Lord like a gazelle, light on her feet, because his yoke is easy and his burden is light. She's full of life, vitality, free. I don't know. What do you think? Trying to draw some parallels in me brain. It'd be interesting to do a little study on what you know, and the history of the gazelle in Israel, and like what um, like how it was culturally referenced, and there's probably something there.
the equivalent Hebrew name, according to Wikipedia, her equivalent Hebrew name is Zibiah, also spelled Zibiah, a name carried by the mother of King Joash of Judah. Some explain the use of the Greek variant of Tabitha's Syriac Aramaic name by the fact that she was living in a port city where many inhabitants and visitors would primarily communicate in Greek. Dorcas was a common name of the time, both among Jews and Greeks. That's it. Everybody around her wanted to know what her name meant, and they couldn't speak Aramaic or something like that.
So Peter essentially,
Which is still.
so Peter knelt down beside her bed and prayed. And turning to the body, he said, "Gazelle, get up." Then she opened her eyes. She saw Peter. She sat up. Hmm.
You want to give another crack at with your friend Tim?
I thought that the body might, his brother would raise from the dead during the service. I was like, oh man, I was just waiting for it to happen. I was like, let's go. That'd be so cool. All those people watching. It was a Catholic funeral. It's like, man, this would be so amazing. I'm still kind of, what's the word? Processing that whole thing. Um, Something that stood out to me was, it says that these two men, it says in verse 38, because Lydda was near Joppa, when the disciples heard that Peter was there, they sent two men to him and urged him, come to us without delay. Why did they do that? I mean, she had already died. presumably. It doesn't necessarily say that, so I mean, it's not explicitly called out chronologically here, but I'm inferring it was chronological. So she had died. In verse 37, and then it says in verse 38 that they sent 2 men to Peter and said, "Come to us without delay." So it seems that the intent was to get Peter and have him raise Tabitha from the dead. Alternatively, it could have been that they were just having him come to maybe, you know, preside over a funeral or to comfort her family and friends and the people. But come to us without delay, I guess, you know, back then they didn't, I don't know, maybe they had to have the funeral sooner. And so it was like, please come quickly so we can have our funeral. What do you guys think? Do you think they were having him come for the funeral? Or do you think they wanted him to come and raise her from the dead?
I think to raise her. I mean, that was the implication that I got.
That's what I'm sensing too.
I honestly, reading it again, I could go either way. I mean, it's like she was well known in the community at that time, in that area specifically. You know, yeah, what was it saying here? She was like a seamstress that made clothes and gave them to the church to give out to the poor. And that was like her thing. And so she was like, she's the gal in Joppa who makes clothes for the poor. It's like when I've had a couple church friends or friends of my parents die, and they are prominent enough in the church to where everybody comes to that funeral. It's like, yeah, they touched too many people to just make this a quick family gathering type of deal. And we would sit there for hours with an open mic, and people would just line up around the room. And I knew Dan too. Oh man, I knew Dan, or I knew Dale. And it was just on and on and on.
That's really beautiful. So yeah,
So this could be one of those, yeah, where it's like Peter, even though he's living wherever he's, I guess, Caesarea, which isn't far away from Tel Aviv, I guess. But he knows of this lady up in Joppa. Of course, he's going to go see this. 2 men come by and say, "Hey, we just lost Tabitha." Oh, dang, I'm going to service. I have things to say too. But when he comes around, he's like, "Oh, you know, I saw Jesus do this once."
It feels it seems like my logical brain thinks that scenario, Daniel, that you're talking about is more likely, because we don't see like a whole bunch of in Acts, you know, after Jesus ascends to the right hand of the Father, we don't see like this person was raised from the dead and this person was raised from the dead and you raised from the dead and you're raised from the dead. Like, it's not like a common occurrence. And so why would the friends and family of Tabitha just assume that was going to happen and that Peter would do it? You know what I mean?
Yep.
But then part of me is like, what if they just, you know, what were the other accounts of raising from the dead after Jesus raised from the dead? Is there one other one before this that we have in the book of Acts? It seems like there's one other, or none.
There is one more. It's where the kid is sitting in the open window and Peter's preaching. And Peter just kept preaching, and it got later and later, and the kid fell out of the open window and onto the street.
Is this
And
prior?
everybody's like, because he fell asleep in the window. No, I think it's soon.
It's after. And so there's no other. Yeah, I think that. Yeah. So at least in, as far as it's captured in the book of Acts, we don't see any raising from the dead. This is the first account. This is the first person raised from the dead after Jesus raises from the dead. I think. So
Yeah, I think so.
it,
The other ones are healing of paralytics,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
That
So
happens a couple times.
okay. So it seems that it's more likely that Daniel, your description is what's happening. So when Peter comes and raises her from the dead, it would have been a surprise. Surprise!
Hmm.
He sent them out. He knelt down and he prayed, which is what Jesus did when he raised the girl, the young
Right.
girl. He sent everybody out. Was Peter in the room when he did that?
I don't remember.
Seems like his disciples. He had 2 disciples with him. Um, that would be pretty cool if he was.
He did, yeah, but he did send the mourners out because they laughed at him. Oh, she's only asleep.
Who was with Jesus when he raised the girl from the dead? Jairus' daughter, Mark 5:35 through 43. He was accompanied by 3 of his disciples, Peter, James, and John, and the girl's father and mother. So Peter was in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Yeah, so Peter remembered the moment. And he probably thought to himself, Lord, do you want to raise this girl from the dead? I've seen you do it, so it doesn't hurt to ask. And then he asks. And then Jesus does it. That's pretty awesome. Well, I'd really like to just spend some quiet time with the Lord, with you guys.
Yeah.
Let's do that for a bit and just soak in this word and soak in his presence. I did send, just so you know, I sent a link, I think it was yesterday, to just a YouTube video that has this really nice ambient worship music to play in the background during contemplation times if you want to use that. Um, but I'm going to turn that on myself and just put it on mute, and then we'll come back in a bit. All right. Lord, Lord, thank you for this word. Just enter this time with you in silence and just to soak in this truth and to soak in your presence, to become more like you, Jesus, to transform us, our hearts and our minds, to know you deeper. Okay. Good morning. Let's talk about our experience, shall we?
Sounds good.
I want to hear about what the Lord was saying. What were you thinking? What were your thoughts? What was happening during that time?
I was putting this moment where he walks in. And then all the widows stood around him crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was with them. I mean, these weren't professional mourners here. These are actual friends.
Hmm.
And then I can imagine him going up to that room and just kneeling there praying, mourning a little bit. And then as he's praying, some little switch in his brain. Remember when Jesus was with you in an upper room with that girl? Oh, yeah. I wonder if it would work. And I wonder how timid his faith was, or how strong his faith was when he just, Tabitha, get up, see if it works. And then it does.
That's awesome. Perhaps he was just as amazed as everybody else. He had this little faith of a mustard seed in just a short moment, because he had the advantage of being with Jesus in the room when he raised Jairus' daughter. He's like, God, I know you can do this. I've seen it before. I was there.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty awesome. That's beautiful. That strengthens my faith. It reminds me that I don't have to be some sort of like spiritual like superhero. It's just really his childlike faith and asking God to do the work. How about you, Dylan?
I was thinking of it's difficult in our modern conception, of the world to really wrap our head around miracles.
Mm-hmm.
I think back in this time, people were just more receptive to the possibility. Maybe that we already said before that it was not common. This sort of thing is not common. So I mean, what I was thinking about is, what should we, is it proper to expect any to witness any sort of miracles, or is it proper to, like, what's the balance there? Um, or is it more proper to just place to just kiss it up to God? And I don't know. I'm just trying. I guess I don't know. It's difficult to describe. I guess. But I was just thinking about the what's the proper way to conceptualize stuff
Right.
like this.
Yeah, like how much expectation should we have? And what should our
Yeah.
posture be? Should it be God can do this miracle, and I believe he can if he wants to, or God will do this miracle, or God is doing it, or God has done it? Like what? Like there's a whole spectrum of belief there and faith.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't know. It's pretty much. I don't know. It's a difficult concept to describe, but yeah, just meditating on that.
Yeah.
I guess.
can, will, is, has. It's kind of interesting. It's like 4 degrees of faith. Can, will, is, has. For me, I had heard, I am the God of weakness to strength and death to life, from brokenness to beauty. It's just these stories that we're reading. They're examples of God's transformation in people's lives, right? And it was like, always believe this, regardless of what you see with your eyes, because this is the truth. Believe. So I just felt encouraged by God, regardless of the experience that I had in trying to, and praying for my friend's brother, and like, despite what I saw with my eyes, continue to believe in who I am. God, God saying that. I am the God of death to life, So I was just trying to really soak in that, really anchor that truth in my heart in that time. Okay. Well, gentlemen, any last thoughts before we call it a wrap?
Not from me, no.
I think I'm good.
Awesome.